Hey guys, welcome to this video series on applied game design. I'm Dr. Bob and this video is on ethics in video games. Now if you haven't been living under a rock since the turn of the millennium, I'm sure you've noticed that video games have become quite lifelike. For example, this is some footage from The Last of Us, a game from 2013. So this is an older game, but look at how realistic these graphics are. If you aren't familiar with it, The Last of Us is a game about Joel and Ellie who are basically trying to survive a fungus-themed zombie apocalypse. The game was a milestone in its days, in particular because the realism of the game was off the charts. Just look at the emotions on the faces of the characters. It's a game that's as captivating as any drama series on TV, but that's what high-quality video games are like. They are a powerful communicative medium, and with great power comes great potential, but in the words of Uncle Ben, also great responsibility. Which brings us to the topic of ethics. Now I talked to my friends about this topic and I learned pretty quickly that while we use terms such as ethics and morals quite often and loosely, we don't always know exactly what is meant with these concepts. So before I continue talking about video games, I'm going to give you a quick definition of both concepts. So let's start with morals. Morals are the individual reflection of our habits and norms. So morals help us to decide whether our intentions, decisions and actions are either good and right, or they are bad and wrong. Now ethics, on the other hand, are the philosophy of morality. It's a discipline of philosophy and one that provides us with a critical and systematic reflection on morals. In other words, it's the study of how the difference between right or wrong is decided. Let me show you some examples of that. Ethics have three branches and they ask the same question. What do we need to do to be a good person? The first branch is called virtue ethics. It states that being a proper human being is all about possessing and developing virtues, such as wisdom, justice, or courage. The second branch is called consequentialism. It states that the overall outcome of an action determines whether it's right or wrong. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that sort of thing. And if that's not familiar, you might have heard of utilitarianism, which is a consequentialist theory. The final and third branch is deontology. It states that rules determine whether an act is right or wrong. As a result, the difference between right or wrong depends on who makes the rules. Philosopher Immanuel Kant, for example, uses practical rules and asked himself questions such as these two. Would I like to be treated like this? And what if everybody would do that? So those are the three branches of ethics, but I'm sure that you could use an example to clear things up a little bit. So let's look at lying. How do these branches feel about lying? In virtue ethics, lying is not okay because it's not a virtuous course of action. Consequentialism, on the other hand, is a little trickier. If the overall outcome is better than what happens when you're not lying, it's okay. So white lies are fine. Deontology then, or more specifically Immanuel Kant's two rules that I mentioned earlier, contradict each other a bit. Would we want to be lied to? Probably not, but sometimes we might not want to know the truth. Then again, if everybody would lie all the time, we'd get stuck in a silly Jim Carrey movie, and that's no way to live either. So, the answer to the question, should I lie, according to ethics, well, it's complicated. But it's a good kind of complicated, especially if you're a game designer, because games have a special feature when it comes to dealing with the complexities of ethics. We have interactivity. Drama often relies on placing characters in seemingly irresolvable moral situations, and we are captivated by their inner turmoil. For example, this is a scene from AMC's The Walking Dead where the characters meet a group of inmates and they are forced to decide between killing them right away, ensuring their own safety, or running the risk that they will turn on them later. As many other scenes in The Walking Dead, this offers potential for ethical reflection. First of all, we want to know what the character will do. Second, we want to know what we would do in this situation. The first question will be answered if we keep watching, but since this is a non-interactive TV show, the second we will never know. However, The Walking Dead has also spawned a number of video games and some pretty good ones too. In The Walking Dead games made by Telltale and Skybound Games, there are also moral decisions to make, sometimes also involving the life of someone else, like this scene. Now, in contrast with the drama series on television, only one question remains: what will I do? And we have to answer that question under time pressure, and after making our decision, we will be reminded that other people will remember what we did and that our actions have consequences. So in contrast to other media, digital games offer us interactivity and the chance to truly explore our morality. And that's why ethics researchers talk about games as moral spaces. They have attributes such as investment of personal resources, socialization processes, social motivation, attachment, and identity. Now when these attributes are present, ethical dilemmas and moral decisions can easily arise. For example, when we bring our own morals into the game. Should I cheat or should I steal virtual items? But also when the games themselves present us with moral choices and ethical systems. And that's what we're going to be discussing in this episode, and to do that I'm going to talk about 3 games. This is Fallout 3, a game from 2008 by Bethesda. In the game, mankind has moved on after a nuclear disaster and tries to survive a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Water is scarce and radiation is everywhere, and you as the main character have been growing up in the safety of a nuclear vault. In fact, the game starts with you being born in the vault, and it takes a while until you are ready to leave it and get to the outside world. However, the keyword here is post-apocalyptic wasteland. It's a bleak world out there except for one place, hidden amidst mountains, the Oasis. It's literally the only green you will see in the game outside of some mutants and radioactive waste. It's very secluded and difficult to reach. And in the Oasis, we meet Harold.
I was once a man, a long time ago, named Harold.
So Harold is a tree and a person combined, quite a mutation. And Harold would like us as the player to put him out of his misery. But like he said, he's not alone in the Oasis. He's the god of a group of people who call themselves the Tree Minders.
Well, I'm not so sure the Great One is a god. I mean, I don't believe in that sort of thing. However, I am beginning to realize he's special. Something greater than any of the creatures in the wasteland.
He's not my god. He's everyone's god. You, me, everyone. This place isn't meant just for the Tree Minders. It's for all mankind.
Oh, you mean Harold? He's really nice. Sometimes when I get really lonely, I go into the grove and talk to him. Sometimes I even curl up all cozy-like and sleep next to his root after I have a bad dream.
So the Tree Minders want Harold to live, while Harold wants to be put out of his misery. And as the player, we get to play God and decide what we will do. Well, we should help Harold. I mean, he suffered enough, but if we were to do that, then that little girl would be devastated. But if we would inject Harold with the serum, the entire world would benefit. So we find ourselves in quite the ethical pickle here.
Pickle Rick!
Well, let's analyze this further. Harold's dilemma is actually a pretty common biomedical debate. There's a patient who wants to be euthanized and the doctor has to decide what to do. Now, in Western tradition, we are individualists and we will typically follow the wishes of the patient. However, in Asian tradition, the patient is considered a social being and the family's wishes are typically prioritized. Now, this example from Fallout 3 demonstrates how video games can give players ethical choices. Now, if you're answering the questions through the lens of the societal traditions, you are using a deontological option here. However, there's also a virtue option and a consequentialist option. For example, say we were to side with Harold and kill him. That would be virtue ethics perhaps because we are siding with a friend, which could be considered to be loyal. However, if we would side with the Tree Minders, we could look at it as a consequentialist option since we are doing something that benefits the entire world, with the exception of Harold, of course. In any case, Fallout 3 is a great way to illustrate the work of Miguel Sakar, who is a professor at the IT University of Copenhagen and who also has an arcade cabinet in his office. Miguel Sakar would call Fallout 3 an example of open ethical design. In open ethical design, the player's moral values influence the characters and the game world. For example, if you were to kill Harold, the Tree Miners will upset and chase you out of the Oasis. If, however, you give the Tree Miners what they want, the story will evolve differently. In any case, there are many games that use open ethical design. In particular, RPGs like Fallout. RPGs, or role-playing games, let you develop your character and you will become a good or bad character based on your actions. Be kind and honorable and become a respected and loved character, or be evil and vicious and become a hated villain. I've picked Knights of the Old Republic as an example, but there are plenty of others. Of course, while such ethical alignment systems have become prevalent, they are often portrayed as black and white and therefore not as interesting as Harold the Tree's dilemma. And that's actually true for Fallout 3 as well, since your choice in this dilemma does not really impact gameplay, as the world rarely changes for real. It would just be so much work for the game developers to remake all the game environments with more vegetation. Therefore, there are other genres that offer more interesting examples of in-game ethical dilemmas than developing a good, bad, or in-between character. Take Civilization, for example. In Civilization, one builds up a civilization from the dawn of humanity to the space age. In between, there are plenty of opportunities to make ethical decisions. Will I go to war to save my people from starvation? Will you retaliate when an ally is forced to break your commitment to you? Will you help your neighbor who is currently weaker but might become more powerful than you in the near future? There are lots of opportunities to explore ethics, and these decisions impact the world far more than what they would in a typical RPG. So let's open ethical design. Let's move on to a different game now, and let's look at Shadow of the Colossus, a game from 2005 by Team Ico. In the introduction of the game, we see a boy arriving at a castle on a horse. He has a bag, it's a person. In fact, upon closer inspection, it's a girl. The boy puts the girl on the altar and a voice speaks to him. It appears to be some powerful entity, and the boy asks the voice to revive the girl. And that's the premise. Now, of course, since resurrecting a person is tough and even gods have to eat, the boy, who is actually called Wander, is asked to kill 16 giants that roam the lands. So in the game, we, as Wander, go out in the world to slay these enormous beasts. Here we see Wander fight the first and smallest one, which involves a lot of climbing and puzzling to eventually reach the giant's weak spot. Wander stabs the giant, slaying it, and this results in Wander growing stronger and getting one step closer to reviving his loved one. Now, this process happens 50 times more as Wander travels the land slaying these colossi. And then we get to the ending, which unfortunately I am going to have to spoil for you. Because it turned out that that voice was actually an evil demon, and the giants turned out to be his prison. And by killing each one of them, you've set the demon free. So, in Shadow of the Colossus, Wander is not the good guy. In fact, it's revealed that Wander stole the magic sword and used a forbidden spell prior to the events in the game as well. So sorry about that. When you're playing Shadow of the Colossus, you're the bad guy. Or maybe not, because you are doing it for love and your heart is pure, right? But then again, what did those giants ever do to you? So I guess you get my drift at this point. Once again, we find ourselves in an ethical pickle. So let's analyze it a little further using the work of Miguel Sacar. This is what Miguel would call a closed ethical design. In Shadow of the Colossus, our own moral values are not being taken into account. The game is not asking us how we feel about killing these giants, and it does not offer us a way to revive our loved one without killing anyone. Furthermore, Shadow of the Colossus is an example of subtracting ethical design. The game pretty much excuses itself from any moral discourse, and it doesn't place any moral judgments anywhere. The giants that you are fighting are not really acting hostile towards you, and the game does not tell you that you are doing something wrong by killing them. Or maybe it does, because in the beginning of the game, Wander looks young and healthy, but as you make progress, he starts to look more sickly and brooding. Now, that is counterbalanced though. For one, the game is a low resolution game from older times, so it's hard to pick up on it unless you are actually looking for it, but also, as you progress through the game gives you more stamina and strength for slaying these giants. So even though you might look bad, you are getting better. Now, you might be thinking, why is this a video game? Why not just a movie? In essence, there's not that much interactivity when it comes to these ethical choices. And that is true to some extent, but if you really think of it, if this was a movie, it would be a plot twist at best. Wander is the bad guy, well, okay, I did not see that coming. However, in the form of a game, we are all accomplices. Wander is the bad guy, so we are the bad guy. And that's a lot more powerful experience. Anyways, let's look at some other games with subtracting ethical design. The Flash game September 12th is perhaps the most minimalist version of closed ethic design. This is a simple web game in which we control a weapon and we are looking at an Arabic village filled with people, some of which are armed. Now the typical reaction here is to create a set of values based on what the design implies. Fire away and take out the terrorists. The only problem with that is that there is a lot of collateral damage with every shot you take. Buildings are torn to shreds and the unarmed villagers mourn their departed, after which they pick up arms as well. In the end, there is only rubble and a whole lot of armed villagers. Similar to Shadow of the Colossus, the game never evaluates the morals of our actions. The game is what it is, and the only ethical gameplay is to actually not play. And that's subtracting ethical design. Now let's look at the final ethical design that I wanted to discuss. And to do that, we're going to have a look at Manhunt, a game by Rockstar Games that was made in 2003, which is the company that you might remember from Grand Theft Auto. In Manhunt, you play as James Earl Cash, an inmate who was supposed to be executed on death row. However, his execution was faked and he now finds himself forced to participate in a series of snuff films created by someone who refers to himself as the director. Throughout the game, Cash will have to make it from point A to point B while being hunted by white supremacists, ex-military mercenaries, satanic cultists, asylum inmates, and even Pixie, a fat psychopath with a chainsaw who wears an actual pig's head as a mask. The game itself is a stealth game. In essence, you move through buildings and streets, attempting not to be seen or heard while taking out the bad guys. The game is very suspenseful, and the fact that you have the director talking into your ear through the one-eared PlayStation headset was at the times both innovative, but also extremely creepy and lifelike. Also, since you have a microphone in front of your mouth, you also have to be really quiet because the headset will alert the bad guys and you have no chance against them after they spot you and hunt you down in packs. Now, the reason why Manhunt became a big deal in the media is because the game has an interesting mechanic. Namely, the longer you manage to stand behind an enemy while pressing the kill button, the more gruesome the kill will be. Stand behind the enemy and do a normal button press does a quick kill. Standing behind the enemy and pressing the button for a couple of seconds makes it a brutal kill. Even longer, and James Earl Cash gets creative and disturbingly gruesome in its method of murder. Now, this example uses a baseball bat, and I'm only going to show you the beginning of the clip. So there you have it. James Earl Cash does some truly gruesome stuff with common household items and power tools, so he must be one of the worst characters we've seen in recent popular culture, right? Well, maybe not, because we learn that he's wrongfully accused and he's just trying to survive. But if that were to be the case, then why do these kills have to be so gruesome? And if you think of it, why did game designers think it was a good idea to reward players for the most gruesome kills that they could possibly manage? But then again, it's not like that either, because the control is actually being taken away from players during those execution scenes, so we find ourselves in another ethical pickle. Now, I'm not going to discuss Manhunt as a cultural artifact or why people, including myself if I'm really honest, enjoyed playing the game, or if people could get homicidal from playing a game like this. I'm here to discuss Manhunt as an ethical game, and if we look at it in that light, it's actually quite similar to Shadow of the Colossus. It's a closed ethical design because our own moral values are not being used in the game itself. However, in contrast to Shadow of the Colossus, Manhunt is an example of mirroring ethical design. Mirroring ethical design happens when the game forces its own moral position onto the player. For example, in Manhunt, the game asks that we adopt the stance of it's okay to kill in order to survive. If we don't, we can't really make any progress in the game, and that's a powerful ethical experience. However, Manhunt also offers an interesting take on reward system, since at the end of every level, you are given a certain amount of stars for how gruesome the kills were you performed. So, if you're unwilling to adopt Manhunt's moral position, the game is asking you, how many stars is it gonna take for you to give me your morality? And that's a pretty interesting take on gamification, if you ask me. Anyways, if we delve deeper in mirroring ethical design, we end up in a pretty dark place. Take Super Columbine Massacre RPG. I personally haven't played it because I really don't want to, and we should by no means trivialize these events. However, I can explain what the game is about. Super Columbine Massacre RPG is a game that looks like a 16-bit Super Nintendo role-playing game, but with a twist. You are reenacting the Columbine Massacre as the killers. While the game does not look realistic in any way, it is filled with references and audio that you might have heard in documentaries from what happened during the Columbine events. Like Manhunt, it forces you as a player to adopt moral values that hopefully do not match your own, as you join the killers on their way to hell, and I mean that literally because that's the final level of the game. Again, playing this game takes a strong stomach, as it's a powerful ethical experience. And that's mirroring ethical design, which brings me to my final thoughts, because I have a couple of points I would like to share with you. First off, to keep things flowing well and concise, I didn't cite all my sources, so here's a slide with the books and amazing scholars that inspired this talk. So second, I feel that as game designers we should be comfortable with letting ethics be complicated. In a lot of games, when we develop a character, we get ethical choices, but they only lead us to either being a goody two-shoes, an immoral SOB, or something weird and peculiar in between that doesn't even fit any category. Ethics are complicated, and we should just respect that. Third, an ethical game requires an ethical player. Now, while the dilemmas that I've discussed in this episode can be pretty fascinating, if you look at the forums online, you'll find that most people are just discussing one thing about them. What are the consequences and mostly the rewards that we are going to get after we make certain choices? Sure, option 1 could be +5 resilience, and option 2 could be a particularly sharp butter knife that lights up in the dark when orcs are around, but players are not making any ethical decisions when they are making dilemmas based on the rewards they're gonna get. So as designers, we need to be mindful of that, and again, treat ethics with respect. And finally, I would like to add something to the conversation, since most of the things I present in this video are my interpretation of the work of others. Now, there is a form of ethics that I've been thinking about that I haven't really seen discussed anywhere. I would call it emergent ethics, and with that I mean when games provide ethics that the designer did not intentionally put in there. Games are basically a set of simple rules, but those rules often lead to unexpected complex results that we can't really predict. For example, the rules of chess can be summed up rather briefly, but the resulting strategies are extremely complex, only to be mastered by studying the game for years and years. So that's why we say that many games are emergent systems. Now let's bring ethics into the mix. Here's a clip from Quake 3. It's a bloody up-tempo free-for-all rocket launcher powered shoot-em-up fest multiplayer game. Now, I have a story about this game that went viral on the internet when it broke. Quake 3 lets you play against your friends, but you can also add bots to the game. Computer-controlled players that work on artificial intelligence. Now, the way that worked was through a neural network. Simply put, it meant that the bots would keep doing things that work and stop doing things that would get them killed. They basically learn from their mistakes and aim to stay alive as long as possible and get as many kills as possible. Now it gets even better. There was this guy that thought it's really cool that these bots are learning and getting better at fighting, so he put together a server on his computer and had them fight each other to see what would happen. Well, he did that for a while and then he got bored. Now, since these are basically robots, they kept fighting and fighting and fighting, and eventually, after 4 years, the guy noticed that his disk space was getting pretty low, so he started to look what was going on. And this is what he found. Some pretty big files, in total 8 gigabytes of data, which was a huge amount at the time considering Quake 3 only needs 70 megabytes of free disk space to run. Those gigabytes were the neural network data for each of the bots that told him what to do. Wisdom accumulated over 4 years. So the guy thinks to himself, whoa, this is awesome, I gotta see this. These bots must have turned themselves into the ultimate killing machines by now. So he logs into the server and nothing. The bots are just staring at each other, staring at him. There is nothing going on, not a single shot fired. So after 4 years of calculating, the bots figured out that the most optimal strategy for them to survive is not to kill anyone. It took them 4 years to figure out that war is pretty much pointless. Now, unfortunately, it's a hoax. Quake 3 bots don't use neural networks, but I felt it's still a nice story to end this episode with. After all, I kinda hope that we get to the point where AI can infuse ethical systems in games so that we can see ethics emerge that neither players or designers would ever be able to predict. Well, Reggie, I hope you enjoyed that video, being the bestest boy and all. And I hope you enjoyed the video as well. And if you did, make sure to check out the scholars that I mentioned earlier, because there's a lot more to the field of games and ethics than what I showed in this episode. But with that, I'm going to leave you with the discussion points. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.